All right, folks, we're going to get started here. Thank you all for joining us for Chamber Talks. This is our fifth, I think, Chamber Talks event. Second time we've been here. We were here last year and it was so great we decided to come back. It's such a lovely space. Thank Angela and Christina and her staff for hosting us tonight, providing us with great food. Feel free during the program if you want to get up and get another drink or something to eat. That's okay. Help yourself. And without further ado, we'll get into the program. We can't do something like this without support from our sponsors, so I want to thank our sponsors tonight, Murphy, Hesse, Toomey, and Lehane, Mass General, Brigham, and Westwood, One Local Bank, and Rockland Trust for your support. Thank you very much. And with that, I will be pleased to turn things over to our moderator for the second year in a row. Robert Carini from McGowan Pro is going to lead the discussion. So, Rob, take it away.
Thanks, Tom. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. Tonight's going to be on mass exodus. We're going to be talking about why people are leaving, how we can keep people here. We're going to be discussing some things about housing, about high cost of inflation. We're talking about education, and we're going to have a lively discussion on all of those topics. While we have our discussion up here, take notes, and we're going to have an open time at the end for any questions that you might have. I'm going to turn it over to Doug here first, and he's going to give an introduction on his what he does, and pass it on down.
So thank you. Doug Cowgate, I'm the president of the Massachusetts Taxpayers Foundation, and we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan, basically a think tank that looks at public policy issues that relate to Massachusetts and its economic growth. We do a lot of work on the state budget, state taxes, but also policy areas that would affect that kind of economic future of the Commonwealth, so transportation, housing, demographics, education, things like that. And so look forward to the discussion today.
Hi, I'm Paige Duncan. I'm the town manager of the town of Foxborough. So I deal with all things town operations. But prior to that, I've been in this role for just a little over a year. I kind of fell into it by mistake. But prior to that, I was a director of land use and economic development. So my background is in planning. I spent several years working with CHAPA, actually in a conversation on housing in Foxborough. Didn't go well. So I'm here to bring sort of the political realities of like a lot of things that we want to, we're going to propose. We have to then also remember, we have a lot of towns have town meetings. So I'll bring that because we got to get the voters to go along with us. So.
It wasn't the CHAPA part of the conversation that didn't go along.
No, sorry.
Okay.
Despite the best efforts of all, we did not get through town meeting with some zoning changes. So, and a lot of our local communities are dealing with that stuff right now. So.
Absolutely. I'm Rachel Heller, the CEO at CHAPA, Citizens Housing and Planning Association. We're a statewide nonprofit working to promote the production and preservation of homes that are affordable for people with low and moderate incomes, and to foster neighborhoods that are diverse and sustainable. We work primarily at the state level, but we also provide support to communities and really help community, municipal staff, and people in the community work together to advance housing. We work regionally as well, connecting with other housing groups in New England and a little bit federally.
Thank you for having me. I'm Greg Bunn. I'm the Executive Director of the Metro Southwest Workforce Board. We are one of the 16 workforce boards in Massachusetts. You're like BRAC, we're the largest workforce board. We cover 43 cities and towns. We're a non-profit organization, but we are funded primarily through federal act, called the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And our role is to help provide workforce development services for job seekers as well as businesses. So I'm here to answer questions people might have about what does the labor market look like, what are some struggles businesses are having finding talent. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Greg. I'm happy to be here too. My name is Jill Rossetti. I'm the Superintendent Director at Blue Hills Regional Technical School in Canton. I've been in public education for over 30 years, and this is my 6th year as the Superintendent at Blue Hills. If you don't know anything about Blue Hills, we have 17 vocational technical programs that are different, and we provide opportunities for students to go directly out into work with local industry.
Great, thank you for being here. Let's give everyone a round of applause.
Sure. So we, about a month ago, released a competitiveness index, which if I thought a little more about it, I would have come up with another name, because it's hard to say immediately. But really what we wanted to do is provide a bit of a foundation to a lot of the discussion I think you'll hear today, and you hear around the Commonwealth about how's Massachusetts doing, right? Are we doing enough to attract and retain people? What are the areas where we can do better? Where are the areas that are currently areas of strength that we need to kind of expand upon? And the reason why we did it is, I think it has been an area of conversation for quite a bit, especially since the pandemic, since things like the millionaire's tax went into place. You see this kind of ongoing debate about, you know, do we need to, what the state needs to be doing? And I think a lot of the discourse on it is not overly constructive, right? Some of it tends to say Massachusetts is the worst place in the world, no one would ever want to live here, it's amazing anyone lives here currently. And half of it says, you know what, we got nothing to worry about, we're going to be successful forever, and anything we do one way or the other can't hurt that success. And of course, like anything else in life, the truth lies somewhere in the middle, right? There are some things we do really, really, really well. And you know, it's funny with the colleagues on the panel here, right? You think of our competitive strengths, it's things like our education system, right? Both higher ed, K-12. When you think about some of our challenges, it's the size of our labor force and making sure we have a workforce that connects to our economy. It's housing, right? And having a perspective from the towns, I think we'll see that you have very different perspectives depending on where you're at in the state, kind of what your workforce looks like, what your housing profile looks like, all those things. And so we wanted to lay something out that just didn't give Massachusetts a grade or say, you know, we're a 7.2 or a 9.7, but instead to say, listen, let's start to distill some of these things we're really good at that we presumably want to make sure we continue to be really good at, and then how can we really start to identify some of those challenges. And when you look at thematically where the strengths are, it's all about the intersection between education, the economy we have, and how those things work together, right? That's really where it is about. And when you look at the challenges, it's the fact that we're expensive, right? However you measure it, we're expensive. Housing, childcare, transportation, all those types of things. And it's potentially possible, we see some of this borne out in the data post-pandemic, people are more sensitive, more price sensitive to cost now, right? That you might be a little more able to leave where you're from, work remotely, things like that. And so maybe we need to be a little more concerned that what has always been a challenge, our you know, lack of cost competitiveness, is going to be more of a competitive disadvantage. So that's really kind of what it was about.
So for those of you who are nerds and like charts and graphs, this thing is loaded with it.
Yeah.
And it's some good stuff, easy to read. One of the things that I noticed was, speaking about mass excellence, was the migration by income.
Yeah.
So it looked like we were losing at the top and the bottom.
Exactly. So the big question is, and this is honestly another area of frustration for me in the policy conversation, is this question of who's leaving, right? And you've got some folks who want to say it's just wealthy people, and that's what we need to worry about. And some folks who say, forget that, it's just lower income people who can't afford to live here. And the reality is, you can have multiple problems at the same time, right? And when you look at the data, when you look at who's leaving disproportionate to their share of the population, kind of three things stand out. It is higher wealth individuals. And this data predates the millionaire's tax, right? So this is a factor, and a guy named Luke Schuster at the Boston Indicators Project has done some great work on this. Higher wealth families disproportionately have been leaving the state. But lower wealth working families are the other family you see disproportionately leaving the state. And that's, one would imagine, due to affordability issues, right? Of core elements of affordability, think childcare, think housing, think things like that. And then the third group that stands out, which you don't see in the income breakdown, but it's younger people, right? It's 18 to 35, 26 to 44, it depends on kind of what data source you use. But it's folks who are kind of starting their careers, starting their families, who are seeing them disproportionately leaving in increasing numbers. 26 to 44, about double the number of those folks are leaving this last year than left in the years before the pandemic. So what's going on there, right? Because that's critical for kind of the economic future, wherever you stand on kind of the policy issues that sometimes people disagree on.
All right, great, thanks. I want to move on and ask Greg a question. So what strategies do you see employers using to stop that out-migration?
A lot of what we're seeing from employers is trying to offer more benefits to address that work-life balance. One of the changes we quoted was the ability to work from home. So more employers are struggling to offer that. The big challenge, though, a lot of the occupations that are really critical to our industry right now, in terms of what we look at a lot of job posting data, and we're seeing primarily software development, registered nurses, manufacturing, and retail. Of those, really the only thing you can do working from home is some of the IT type funding. So as much as employers want to shift from that, it's inevitable reality that they're going to have to change up their tactics. The other thing we work with employers to try to get them to understand is what the competitive salary ranges are. So some of that can change locally. So working with us, we have some data. We can look at what a registered nurse will get in one area versus another, so employers can stay competitive. And then the more intangible part of it is we also give some guidance on how mid-level supervisors can actually be good supervisors and retain talent. So people can easily change jobs, go to a different employer. If you have a terrible supervisor, people are going to go. So we work with lawyers to try to coach in those aspects too. So those are some of the strategies that we're beginning with.
So, Jill, you were talking about that you have 17 different programs. What are you seeing at the school that is either in high demand or that the kids want? Or what can you add to the conversation about what your school is doing to fill in some of those holes?
So Blue Hills has a huge waiting list to get in. And if we built another school, I could actually fill it and still have a waiting list. We just decided we're investigating and researching adding a dental assisting program. So we'll be going to apply for that with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. We see a lot of kids that want, or students that want construction trades, health assisting, information technology, and we don't have manufacturing, but we have metal fab. And it's full. I mean, it is just full. What I'd like to do for the students is maybe expand a little more on some dual enrollment in early college. So the students that need to go get those little extra degrees have articulation agreements and can get free college. So I'm interested in seeing the data from the free college. And I think Tennessee has a wonderful program where they've just they've been looking at the data. And what they did to make it a little bit more successful was they created articulation agreements between the community colleges and the university, so those credits all transferred in. So sometimes it's seamless in Tennessee, so I was hoping that that's something we can look at.
And one thing I would just say, what strikes me in both those answers is, the nature of what kids want and also the nature of employment that needs to be here is changing, right? And so I think one of the things that the state has done a good job on, but we don't move quite as quickly as some other states, is, we've seen a sea change in vocational education and demand for that over the last 20 years, right? We now have all of those schools have huge waiting lists. I think partially because of what kids are looking for in connecting those kids then to workforce areas where IT, you can work IT from anywhere. So we've seen huge job losses in Massachusetts for IT, where some of the things we're hearing about in a vocational school like that, those are the places where those jobs can't move, right? You need construction workers to be physically present, so we're kind of making those things work together.
And I think that we've really worked hard to try to elevate the perceptions of the vocational technical schools, because it is a competitive advantage for students. They can leave with a cosmetology license. So the more industry recognized credentials that we can provide for students, the better off that they are, and they can always choose to go right out into the workforce, which we need locally. We also provide health assisting, so they become CNAs first, then they might go on to be an LPN and an RN. So this is really important. The more industry recognized credentials each of the 17 programs have, which is that's what we're working for. It says to an employer, hey, I took the time and I could pass this, and I know safety, and I passed A+, or I passed a Cisco networking exam.
Yeah, I would just add to that, I think there's a lot more recognition amongst young people that they don't have to go to college, that there are so many careers that they can get, and that is making it more attractive. And college debt is really hurting so many people that I will hear from my own 12-year-old that he is worried about the cost of college and he is considering other options. So I think that's a real, one, just seeing it as an attractive way to get into the workforce, but also recognizing the cost of college and how that really burdens people for a very long time.
One of the things that caught my ear, and I don't know if it's the same for you folks out there, but I was surprised that all of the schools have waiting lists. Is there anything that the state is doing to address that you're aware of?
Some of the schools have gotten grants to build new schools. I know there's different ones that are being built right now. We've actually expanded a little bit more. The problem is the space, so we were looking into different things. Could we rent out empty buildings? There seems to be a lot of empty buildings. Could we do things like that? So they are looking into it. Some of them do after dark programs, I call them, where they come after school. We have CTI grants we have from the state that we work with, so we train, we're starting to train students that might be 17 or 18, not sure they want to go on to college, but they want to get a job, they're interested in something, we partner with the company, and then the company will provide instruction, so they kind of groom those students to what they need, and they provide the teachers, and we have some of our own teachers. So we are working hard. I mean, I wish we could take all of the students, they just can't fit them all.
It's such a change. I probably did myself, but when we were in high school, the voc tech is where you were sent if you were a punk. And now we see all the the CTI program, the Career Textile Initiative, are really great options too for adult learners because all that equipment that are in voc tech schools get used for a third shift for adult learners who come in after 3 o'clock. So we're working hand in hand with the voc tech schools to get applicants in. We're seeing a fair amount of demand on some of these blue-collar job and training opportunities, like HVAC, carpentry, manufacturing. So it's really there are options out there to address this. You don't have to do this typical linear 4-year college progression. So at least that gives people some hope and incentive.
And I would just say, one of the things that I think that in Massachusetts is not unique in this, but we're kind of trying to fix the plane as it's flying, right? Where we've had in our K-12 system and our higher ed system, our areas of strength, right? And so as you're figuring out how to re-image how we do workforce, I think one of the things, we've written a number of reports recently on workforce because what you find is there's a ton of things that we're doing very well in individual areas, but the scalability of it isn't always great, right? And so we know what works in some areas, or we know what works and could be scalable, but we don't always have good architecture. This gets back to some of the local control issues I think we'll talk about in other areas as well, where our ability to communicate what works and then incentivize or force people to do those things in more areas, that can be a challenge, and I think workforce is a good example of that.
So that leads me to change direction a little bit. I don't want to go, I guess, in my direction. So, Greg, you said something about adult learners. Do you have adult learners in the after school?
We have an adult basic education program, satellite program in Dedham. And we provide English as a second language for adult learners during the day.
Okay.
And we also provide HiSET, which used to be the GED.
Yeah.
And now, do you have workforce programs that are available to migrants?
Yeah, so the migrant situation has really exploded over the last year and a half. We, just in this area, I think we have shelters. We have 2 shelters that we're working with in Dedham, one in Foxborough, another one in Norwood. So what we're trying to do is work with these individuals to address some of the initial English-speaking needs. Some of the biggest challenges we're seeing is finding capacity for instructors who can speak Haitian Creole and complete some of these classes. It's a little more difficult than working with individuals who speak Spanish. A lot more employers have staff on board who speak Spanish. There's not as many employers who have Haitian Creole community staff. So that's we actually go in. We have staff dedicated solely to prepping these individuals and connecting them with employers. It's been a challenge. There's been a lot of ups and downs. Some of the barriers we run into are things like childcare. This is aside from the language of the childcare, transportation. Some of these individuals are getting a fair amount of housing relocation funds. So where we're working with them in a particular shelter is not exactly where they're going to end up. But aside from those challenges, one of the things that we're trying to do is do work readiness workshops that center on setting the expectations for what American work-life culture is. One of the things we learned early on on, we held some job fairs, and some of the individuals from the shelters just felt that this is where you go to get assigned a job, not where you go meet an employer and build a relationship. So really just managing those expectations, but then really trying to find resources to provide those ESOL services. So a lot of the state funded programs are run through the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and those have huge waiting lists too. So we're trying to work with private partners, anybody we can, to provide baseline level of ESOL services. One thing, we're working with this organization called English for New Bostonians, and they're actually using some web-based software called Burlington English, where individuals can go on and it's web-based and self-based. The nice thing about it is individuals can enunciate because it's tied in your microphone, and the software actually gives you feedback, like where to put your tongue, your mouth, pronounce a certain word. I think I should go through it a couple times before I do any more public speaking. But so we're finding some of these issues do have solutions, and we're trying to, as Doug said, really build this plane as we go. So we're learning as much as anybody in terms of how to make this work. So we are seeing progress. We are seeing some more and more interest from employers. The state has just recently released an incentive to employers who want to hire somebody from a shelter, one of the emergency assistance shelters. If that company can provide some level of what's called training on the job, that company can get reimbursed with a tax credit of $2,500, and I think it goes up to $150,000 per company. So these incentives are, this is just recently released, so we're trying to kind of wrap this all up in a package for the employers. So we're trying to build the workforce, place the workforce, and then help employers support with post-placement services and tax incentives.
Doug, can you talk on some of the legislation around workforce?
Sure. Yeah, and I would say too on the migrant crisis issue, it's such a challenge, right? Because on the one hand, why are we talking here? It's about the issue of not having enough people to support our workforce, right? That's the long-term existential threat. And what's the biggest short-term crisis we have is too many people, right? And how to acclimate them into the workforce and things like that. And so it has to be an opportunity there, whether it's, and I think the thing you're going to hear again and again and again amongst everything else is scalability of English as a second language programming, right? That this is just so outside the scope of what we've done before, right? In terms of the languages we're talking about here, and also just the number of people. Just to put this in perspective, and then I'll get back to the workforce, some of the workforce initiatives. But so the state's emergency assistance program, historically about a $300 million a year program. It's now at $1 billion, right? And that's with the number of families in the shelter capped and the amount of time they can spend in shelter capped. And so there really is kind of this ticking time bomb a little bit in terms of state finances as well as in terms of we don't have the resources to keep that going in perpetuity. At the same time, acclimating these families who have been through quite a bit to get here, right? This isn't just somebody just like, I'm going to go to Massachusetts one day. Usually these are, where our office is in Boston, we share on the same floor as the Haitian consulate. And the families you see in there, like these folks have been through a lot to get there, right? And so figuring out how to make sure we can acclimate these folks into the workforce going forward. One, we have to figure out some way to do it. And the better we do it, the better we're going to be prepared to deal with a lot of the challenges I think we're going to hear. In terms of workforce, what we saw during the pandemic is state investments in workforce growing by 5 and 6 times. Now, a lot of that was from temporary federal dollars, right? American Rescue Plan dollars, some temporary state surplus dollars. And like everything in the world, certainly everything in public life, there's a lot of good and a lot that could be improved upon in terms of how we did that. The challenge with workforce among many is you think of workforce needs in healthcare, you think of workforce needs in physical construction, in IT, right? You can name any number of places that have significant workforce needs. And so what that has meant oftentimes over time is we have different workforce programs siloed in different areas of government. And so coordinating those things, kind of creating the programs you're talking about to kind of have a sensible approach to it, that's been a challenge. And in the past, I guess the good news is it was such an under-resourced system where, okay, we could do it better, but this is not a big priority. Now we know it is a huge priority, and so we're really trying to figure out, and I'd love to hear more from your perspective about how we make these things work together, because on the one hand, it makes sense for the state's health and human services industry to have a healthcare workforce program, and for the state's, climate industry to have a climate tech program, but at the same time, you're talking about some foundational skills here in terms of language, in terms of other stuff, that we got to make sure are regionally appropriate, regionally planned, but also make sense for the state's economy going forward.
Great, thanks. Paige, I want to bring you in a conversation from a municipality's perspective, and someone who has a shelter in your town. What have you seen from the government, from the state, federal government, from your town to help with not only housing, but also with workforce enrichment and economic formation?
Sure, so we did get a call, or I got a call from the governor's office last, I think, September, late August, September, I can't even remember now. It was just right when school was starting, I think 5 days before school started. And 93, it's funny because I knew all this so well a year ago, and this tells, I'm distant from it now, so it's a good thing. 93 hotel rooms, we're going to be taking over an entire hotel out on Route 140 for 93 families. So needless to say, we were shocked, and we also did learn about the children that were coming, and then our school system was shocked. What we did was, fortunately, I have a great team, and our team is, our public safety team handled a lot of the COVID response up at the stadium. They handle the stadium, so they're used to handling crises, I want to say. So we just mobilized within 24 hours. We had our task force, and we was everything, public safety, community services, nonprofits, schools, and everybody just rallied. And we tried to keep the politics out of it. That's the hardest part. Is there is a whole political world that's going on. I mean, Donald Trump tweeted about our hotel displacing veterans for the Army-Navy game. So there was just a lot of hype around that, but we just kept our eyes on it. School department sent ESL administrators out, enrolled them right there. So it was a really positive situation for us, not without its challenges. The community rallied. Now again, I also have the little voices of the community not rallying, but we had no trouble. From my understanding, the children were amazing assets into the school system. Not going to lie, we do have financial challenges, of course, from it. We did get $104 per student a couple times, and that helped. But now next year, as we go in and we do have extra teachers, and we've had to do some extra programs. That said, the school has made it seamless on their side. So the families aren't, I don't think, experiencing anything. Budget-wise, we are having some challenges. We don't know what we're seeing. And I will say the reason why it's distant for me is I will give the state credit. When it first happened, we were one of the shelters that did not have a provider on site. So at first it was us, and again, we're out there with Google Translate, trying to do Haitian Creole, which doesn't work well on Google Translate. And, there were some challenges, but it never felt like a crisis. It felt more scary because of what could happen politically, as opposed to what was really happening on the ground. But then the National Guard came in, and that was interesting. And then again, a lot of the community wanted to help, so we had drives, we got diapers and formulas, those were the things that were mostly needed, gift cards. We've learned now not to collect clothes. That's a nightmare. People just give you all their junk, and then you have to get rid of it. So, we learned, and it was really kind of positive exercise for our team. We felt good. And now the state has a provider in there. In fact, Greg's group might be more involved than we are. I know last time I was invited out there, I think in August, for my only visit in a year. And it sounds like they had 70 people who were placed for work at that time. They had 70 people with work permits looking for work, and they had a handful in the works. I know Senator Feeney had arranged with a manufacturer to get jobs and all that. And then to your point, they got relocated, and the company lost their employees, and the employees lost their jobs. So at least the legislature is aware of this, trying to navigate that. But we've had very little, I have very little to do with it, honestly. It's I haven't had to worry about it except financially, but I worry about everything financially, so I'll just add it to the list.
Now, have you worked with the other municipalities? I know Lowell has some, Dedham has some, Attleboro has some. Have you worked with the other communities?
We did create a bit of, not a support group, you know, where we all kind of commiserated and said, what are you doing? What are you doing? And what was interesting was how different communities handled it. And for us, we didn't even think of, you know, I don't know, saying no. I mean, we didn't have a choice. The governor called and said, this is happening. And people were very mad at how can you allow this to happen? It's like, actually, we weren't asked. And I think our level of frustration, honestly, was in the private sector side of things. The hotels, I think, are collecting a hefty sum for their, you know, 100% occupancy. And I feel that they should be offering, like, transportation. You know, get a van or two and hire somebody. And because these people are just placed in these hotel rooms, you know, not near services necessarily. And so we did, some of us all commiserated on, well, what are you doing? What are you making the hotels do? We can't really make them do anything. We can try to make, but we are working now with the state. I guess our lease was supposed to end in December of this year. It's not ending. So I don't know what this temporary housing situation is. I don't know where are they going? You know, I mean, we're going to talk about, I'm sure, the cost of housing. I mean, where are these people going to rent an apartment?
So are there people being outplaced and new people coming in? Is that how it works?
It hasn't happened yet, actually. I mean, in August in Foxborough, no one had been forced out under the program yet. But they had, I believe, been noticed. And then, but with the kids in school, I think there are extensions to try to keep the, and we don't necessarily, it's such a conflict because you want them to transition out and succeed. But on the community side, it's harder because then we get a whole new group of people in that don't speak English, just starting back at square one. They're getting acclimated to schoolroom in the middle of a class, you know, in the middle of a year. So it's this conflict of what you kind of know is good for them, but it's honestly good for us. So we haven't experienced the turnover, and we think we want it, but we actually aren't sure we do. So we're out of it. We have no opinion, you know?
And just so, I think it was in April that the state passed a law to, you know, cycle out folks after 9 months. But as Kate said, there's a number of exceptions and discretion that can be offered. And you know, having worked in government before, this is a challenging problem, right? You cannot control the inflow of how many people are coming to the state, right? They just show up. And you want to give people access to services and things like that, but you know, and so historically speaking, Massachusetts has a right to shelter law, and so there's been no cap on the number of people in emergency assistance. There's now a 7,500 person cap, but you know, when folks talk about some of those policy trade-offs, exactly as you were mentioning, right? If you're in a hotel on the middle of the highway, there's no services there, right? Oftentimes you don't even have a sink or access to you know, kind of standard amenities you would need. And so I think some of the challenges that the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, some of those other groups are faced with in terms of how do you manage all of these competing priorities. And so as the 9-month cap is kind of going into effect, I think we're also seeing in practical fact kind of how do you actually do that, and how do you do it in a way that makes sense for families, but also makes sense for a system that's under strain.
Well, also, and it's been under strain for a long time. So something that a lot of people don't know is that we had 3,500 families living in shelter before we had more people coming because there was no place to go. People don't have the incomes to support the escalating rents. And so there have been times in the past where Massachusetts has been ready when there's an emergency, when there's a natural disaster somewhere, and there's been an all hands on deck and an ability to, you know, there's been some housing options, be able to help people. And we've gotten to a point where vacancy rates are so incredibly low that there's very little options for people. So we went from 3,500 to 7,500. We already got comfortable as a state with 3,500 families living in shelter, and that's not even counting the individuals who don't have the same system. They're living on the streets. They may have access to individual shelter. There's a direct link between our housing challenges and homelessness.
We'll get to housing in a minute. I just wanted to close the loop with Jill and Greg about the workforce. Jill, do you have migrants coming to the school even though you're at capacity?
So we don't, because we're an application school and we have 9 sending towns, so the 9 sending towns. So we're not dealing with that issue right now. However, you know, the state is looking at a lottery system, and so we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, we could, it will, again, I always worry like Paige about the finances. finances of the school. So we don't know what's happening, but you'll hear a lot about that over the next few months, I'm sure.
And if I could just chime in on a complaint, in case there's anybody here, and, we have a charter school in Foxborough, and in fact, it's, the contributing towns, there are a significant, well, I don't know if significant, there were Haitian Creole speaking families already in the charter school system. So when this all came up, we're like, well, it seems fair that the charter school, they have a lot more resources and like, help us out. And because they were a lottery system, even though I don't know if there was room, they don't have to help out. And that didn't feel equitable. It felt like they had resources more at the ready than we did. We had to actually create a whole new kindergarten class. I shouldn't understate it. In the middle, like a month into school, we had to break up a kindergarten class and actually move little 5- and 6-year-olds into a new teacher. So that's not something we take lightly. They're fine, and they did okay, and they did. But so that was a level of frustration that this lottery thing. I mean, I get it for you and it works out, but it's also like the charter schools, they're not having to take and help out at all.
That's interesting. Greg?
So in the schools, one of the things we do and all the other workforce boards do is run career exploration programs. Now that there's so many students coming from parents and families in shelters who struggle with language, we've actually brought on staff who can instruct and speak those languages because a lot of the students in those schools can't take advantage of these career exploration or readiness programs. So we're trying to pivot in that direction. And again, this is sort of an evolving process when you get those challenges. Going back to the local level and the shelter provider level, one thing that this area is really lucky to have is a lot of success depends on how good each shelter provider is. They're not all created the same. Some are really reliable. I mentioned my name. Some of them are terrible to work with. We can't even get access to the shelters, to the individuals, while others are really good. In this area, Commonwealth Care Alliance is running shelters in Dedham, Foxborough, and Norwood. So we see much better placement outcomes when we have a shelter provider who works with people hand in hand. We get more people into classes. We get more people into a work-friendly structure. So really having that partnership is critical to have a good. And I think the state could do a little better job on really holding these shelter providers who have these contracts holding their feet to the fire. And like you said, the hotels they provide better services as well. One of the strange things that we're seeing is that families are getting cars. So actually, faith-based organizations have really stepped up and have donated cars. And in Massachusetts, you can get a license here very easily, even if you don't have proper documentation. So we're seeing actually more people become self-reliant, having their own cars. So that's a positive thing. One thing that the state has done really well and should get a lot of credit for is they've done a really great job of trying to expedite the amount of people who have work authorized status. So the state has actually held these all-day sessions where they've got team orders come in, they try to fast track people through, try to get as many people their work authorization status as well. So that's.
Is there a language barrier with that?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
ESL is a big.
That's the biggest thing. There are people who are filing at these quote boot camps, but the state has made a concerted effort to try to get as many people work authorized as possible. And it's a challenge for us too, because since our funds are primarily federal, I can only spend those on individuals that work authorized status. So that work authorized status opens up a lot of opportunities for individuals in these shelters.
Yeah, just adding on to the challenges of shelters, not every shelter provider is the same. The shelter providers were also suddenly experiencing a lot more and different challenges than they had had for years. So we had more people coming. Also did have language barriers. It's also important to know the whole service side of the workforce. People who are working in shelters, people who do housing search, are working in often low-paying, very stressful jobs. And I've heard from a lot of housing organizations that it's very difficult to compete even with retail because those jobs are paying the same and don't come with the same level of stress and really trying to care for people. And so we really have to pay attention to this side of the workforce. People who are holding up, all of this support, and they themselves are often in an unstable situation in their own housing. So there's a lot to that of what we're not interactive with. That's as well.
So that's perfect, because now we're going to start talking about housing.
Let's go.
Housing, here we go. So, talk to us about MBTA community units.
Love
Why
to.
it's so significant. I think most of us, the majority of us are in towns that have it. Page is a community.
It's going to be great. Norwood, we're in a community
Norwood.
that's adopted it. So the MBTA Communities Act is both an incredibly historic law, but also fits right in with Massachusetts housing policy. This is a state that has long cared about people and our ability to afford housing, going back to 1967 and the passage of 40B, requiring every community to have 10% of our housing be affordable. It didn't stop there. We have so many policies where the state has created incentives. You know, we have a Chapter 40R, law, which maybe some of your communities have used, which is paying communities, really providing that financial support to put the zoning in place that allows for multifamily around commercial centers, around transit, and then also provides this interesting school reimbursement program if there actually is an increase in kids from that development. We're finding more and more there's very little connection between building new homes and actually school enrollment. We can get to that later. So the MBTA Communities Act was passed as part of a package. It was included with Housing Choice, which was Governor Baker's priority to make it easier to put housing policies in place at the local level. You know, we have a 2/3 majority that's required by a town meeting or a city council to change zoning. That's now a simple majority if it's for something that's going to increase your housing stock. So allowing multifamily, reducing parking, that kind of thing. So that was one piece of it. The MBTA Communities Act was all about putting the zoning in place and really just, the voting threshold is important, but you need to have something to vote on, right? And so actually compelling communities, 177 communities served by the MBTA, to put that zoning in place. And there was also another provision that was meant to discourage frivolous lawsuits. So that was actually already challenged in court and has not only survived, but been strengthened by the legislature. So we have 177 communities that now need to put in the ability to create housing. This is really important because you cannot build what is not allowed. We are really living out the effects of policies that were created in the 1970s and 1980s that was all about restricting growth. The intent was to stop housing production, and that is what we're living out now. So in the 80s, we produced double the amount of housing that we do today. So our population has grown, households are smaller, we need more housing. So as a result, we're all experiencing it now. Every income bracket, is experiencing housing challenges. And I recently heard Secretary Augustus speak, and he said, you're all impacted, whether you know it or not. If your favorite coffee shop isn't open the hours that you like anymore, you're impacted by housing. If your kid is living in your basement because they can't actually go out and live on their own, now they've gone, and gone through Vogue, or they've gone to college and they can't support themselves in housing. All of these ways, if you've waited for a hospital appointment, these are all ways that we're all being impacted. So this law is great. We have over 80 communities have now adopted it. We should be at about 140 by the end of December, so a lot more votes coming. Foxborough's coming, Belmont's coming, my community. And then we have another 30 or so that will be voting next year. And if all the communities actually put the zoning in place, we would have the ability to create up to 300,000 homes. Now, as anybody knows about, zoning doesn't equal housing. So, but just even have the ability to create that is a game changer. Because right now, there's very few spots in our state where you could go and build an apartment building without a very lengthy and expensive process that actually is part of driving up the cost.
So not to be added, so,
Bring it.
the town Knoll
Yeah.
is very population dense. They voted for it. Now a town like Foxborough is much less dense, but there's really no
We're at
difference.
14% SHI once
Nice
we're
work.
done.
High five.
Thank you.
But
So,
there's no
don't
real
stick up for the rest of them.
There actually is. There actually is a difference. Yes. So there's different categories of communities, and based on the category, which is based on your level of transit, that determines how much your housing stock is expected to grow. So the rapid transit had the highest threshold, and the adjacent small communities have the lowest. So there's some communities that need to allow for 750 homes, and there's other communities that are larger that need to allow for 4,000 or 5,000. So there really is a big, big range. And what's neat about the law is that the legislature didn't just go ahead and put the zoning in place. It really is left to each community to go ahead and figure out how does this actually help you implement some of the plans that you wanted to implement. I heard Needham passed theirs earlier this week. One of the select board members has long talked about how many wonderful plans around economic development the town has done, and they have not been able to implement those plans. Having something like the MBTA Communities Act has actually enabled them to put that housing in place. They have business owners who are speaking up saying, we need housing. And now they've been able to build up that support so they can start to move forward in a lot of the things that they've wanted to do. I don't think there's a single community that looks like another one when it comes to their MBTA plan.
One other question, can you discuss broad strokes, what's going on in Milton and why,
Sure.
what they did and why that's the
Yes. So with Milton, town meeting actually passed it. It was approved, and then many of our communities do have the ability to bring what is passed by town meeting to a vote, to a referendum. And so in that process, the voters decided that they did not want to comply. And when you don't comply, there's automatic consequences that are in the law, that are in the statute about not being eligible for programs, grant programs. And then Governor Healy also expanded that. So there's about 14 different programs they're not eligible for. So there's that piece of it. Then the Attorney General also did file suit under her powers to really enforce our state laws. Milton has pushed back in a few ways. They're not actually challenging the law itself, which is something that a lot of communities don't understand. What they are challenging is their categorization. They don't believe, that they're a rapid transit community because it's a trolley. They don't believe that the Attorney General has the ability to sue a community because there are some consequences that are already baked into the law. And they believe that the state really overstepped its abilities under the guidelines, that they went beyond what should have been included in guidelines. This is kind of getting into what are regulations, what are guidelines, different processes. Ultimately, the statute directed them to create guidelines, and that's what they did. So that is the case at hand. One of the things I really hope communities understand is, regardless of what happens in Milton, the law is still the law. It is still a requirement for all 177 communities to have multifamily zoning by right, and those financial consequences are still in place. Another important thing to note is, even if the Attorney General weren't able to enforce the law, which would be an interesting outcome of the case, you can have individual property owners who are actually filing lawsuits because they don't have this ability that is approved under state law to be able to have multifamily housing. So it will be interesting to see how this goes. We expect a decision hopefully by the end of the year, but it could be into the new year. So we'll be.
Is the Taxpayers Foundation involvement in it?
Yeah, so we've gotten more into housing policy recently because it's so foundational to all the challenges that we face, right? And so what we say, so I do presentations all over the place, including in Milton recently, and you get asked about MBTA communities, and we're supportive of MBTA communities, and the reason for that is, every community is different, and the issues related to building and developing in a community, those are challenging issues, right? And what I don't want to say is, oh, you should have to do this or you should not have to do this. What I can tell you is, we as a Commonwealth have stopped building housing basically in 1990, right? And now we have the most expensive housing effectively in the country, and we have an issue with people who can't afford housing. So collectively, we got to find a way to build some housing, right? Like that, hopefully people would agree with that. So then the question is, okay, so how do you do it, right? And the idea of trying, with a state that has very, I think, strongly held under, kind of culture of local in law, legal framework of local control, how do you try to reconcile that with state incentives, either positive or negative, to lead to a good outcome? And I think the idea that the MBTA Communities Act is trying to coordinate state grants and things like that with housing, with zoning decisions we want in a local community, does it mean that they got it right in every single program or things like that? I don't know. But the idea that we should be coordinating what the state is providing to communities with behaviors that we collectively think we do achieve, I think that's an important policy we need to do, right? And you know, it's funny, we talked a little bit about building in the vocational school and capital programs. When you think about, so the state spends $800 million a year or so on a school building assistance program, which also has a lot of challenges, right? And needs, I think, a real re-envisioning. From our perspective, when we re-envision that, we don't have the luxury of trying to solve our school building problem and then try to solve our housing problem, right? We have to make our approaches to these things work together, right? We have to say, listen, we only have a set amount of resources to spend on schools and new schools. We're going to try to target those resources to communities who are most likely to have kids who are attending those schools, right? Like, that's the only way we can do it. And so I think that MBTA communities fits into that category for me as well. And I will just say, so I live in Somerville. I live in Davis Square in Somerville. I was walking my dog the other day, and there's this house on my street that now has fencing around it. And I asked my neighbor, I said, oh, what's going on there? And my neighbor, who I love, said, you're going to build a 12-unit housing development there. We're going to fight it. We're going to fight it. And I get it, right? Parking is really easy on my street in the middle of Somerville. And I love that. It is so nice that I don't have to worry about parking on my street. But there's a part of me, the bigger part of me says, well, we all got to work together to make this.
Tell your neighbor that.
Well, I didn't do that yet, but I just moved along. But I think those are the challenges that there's no easy answer to. But that's why we support it.
Right, and I would add to that, housing is the thing that's holding us back. When you look at your competitiveness, that is hard to say.
I know.
We don't have the housing to support the economic growth. So right now we are at a point where we need 200,000 new homes this decade just to stabilize our home prices and rents. The home prices and rents we have right now are way too high for too many people, right? So we have to be very intentional about how we're growing the affordable, deeply affordable, and whether or not we meet that will really determine what the next decade looks like for our state. Are we a state that's thriving? Are we a state where people can stay and raise their families, and people can age and stay here and be near their grandkids? You know, these are the kinds of decisions that we're making right now, and I think that's why we're seeing, you know, not just the MBTA Communities Act passed and Housing Choice. If you look at the bill that was just passed and signed into law, the Affordable Homes Act, there's almost 50 housing policies in there, including accessory dwelling units by right in every community that has single-family zoning. So we're seeing more and more, you know, efforts from the legislature because there is such a need. And if we can do this, like Doug is saying, the rewards are amazing, and we'll really be able to thrive as a Commonwealth.
One of the things that, you know, the term workforce housing is pervasive in everything that we're seeing, both in terms of economic development and decisions of companies are making in terms of where they locate. On the flip side, same thing with job seekers. They're factoring that into to commute or where they can afford a community. So the majority of the discussion around housing seems to be focused on the demand side. What I would really like to see is more discussion on that supply side. One of the big challenges is the amount of people who are buying single-family homes for rental purposes. And a lot of times when if you're a single family, you're going to buy a condominium or a single-family home. You're not competing against other people who are going to use that as a primary residence. You're competing against an investor. So if there were policy around that supply side that gave greater incentive for a seller to sell a home to somebody who's going to use it as a primary residence, or some sort of diminishing returns if you're an investor and you own over X amount of property. So I think I would love to see more discussion at the state level on those policies that kind of fit in the demand side.
Yeah, what you're saying is very interesting. I don't think it actually gets, so you're still housing, right? It's still housing, it's just a different form of housing rental. But it is the biggest barrier to people becoming homeowners, right? It's impossible right now if you don't own a home to become a homeowner. I mean, it is just so incredibly challenging. The prices are so outrageous. They don't match the salaries. And so that's a result of that, right? And there are some new programs that have been created through the Affordable Homes Act that will help to create more homeownership opportunities. There's a program called the Commonwealth Builder. It's been around for a few years. It was used in gateway cities and in neighborhoods in Boston, meant to narrow the racial homeownership gap. Is now being expanded. There's a new homeownership production tax credit meant to stimulate more homeownership. And there's a lot more down payment assistance programs that are in the range of $30,000 to $50,000 that are actually you still need to attach it to other programs to be able to buy something. So I think you are absolutely hitting on this huge challenge that will determine whether or not people stay. You know, because if they can't face these escalating rents, they don't have control over they want to be able to stay home.
Right, and if the schools are the pipeline to the local industry and workforce, but the kids or the students when they graduate can't afford to stay here, they're going to have to move on. So it's all interconnected.
And we see that in the data already, right? With younger folks being more likely to leave. Now, the good news is housing costs are bad in most things,
They
right?
are.
So while we are worse than most, that it was funny when we did this competitiveness index. Our housing stats were terrible, and the one like, you look at it and you're like, wow, they're terrible everywhere though. So now they are
It's
more
terrible
terrible.
everywhere, but we are always at the top.
Yeah, they are more terrible here, but it's something that I think is a big challenge that it's not a community challenge really writ large, especially in the Northeast.
That's a really important point. Sorry, there's a statewide, a national challenge, but the decisions are made locally, and that's where it's a really difficult balance, right?
So we have a very, had to come from Rentham, which is, much less density, and their zoning, like their version of multifamily is 3 townhouses in a row, so that's their zoning. So in Foxborough, they actually have quite a few apartments. And we have what's called an R15 zoning district, which for me, I'm like, this is kind of progressive, because it's only 1/3 of an acre. And most communities out here have gone to acre or 2-acre zoning, so that 1/3 of an acre is great. It also allows 2 families. And you don't see 2-family zoning very often out in the suburbs, so it's great. But what we're losing is, what Greg mentioned, is we have these modest little capes and these modest little ranches that were built back in the 50s. And they should sell for what? $299,000, $350,000, I don't know, like that's what they should be. The investors drive up the price, they'll go in and spend whatever because they tear them down and they put up 2 duplexes next to them and sell them for $500,000 each. So they've now made, they've made all this money, and now we have these monster homes next to these tiny little homes. My fear of tackling that though is like, they'll go after R15 zoning. You know what I mean? We'll end up with just 1 acre, so it's like this kind of catch-22, but we are seeing it firsthand that, we're like, wish the seniors would move out into these smaller homes. Seniors can't afford them.
There's a way to go.
Yeah, they can't go into this because the people are grabbing those things and they're investing them, and they're built so tall for the water table, and then you pose over these tiny, so we're really seeing it on the local level, and it's this great little zoning, and that I'll just bring up like the cost of housing, and I think I have 2 sort of advocacy for perspectives to the business community. Is I'm seeing in Foxborough the utter anger about being told what to do by the state. A lot of the no is, you will not tell me what to do. That's a lot of it. And, I don't know that they're going to pass it on November 18th. I really, we're bringing 2 more proposals forward, so I don't know that they're going to do it despite all the threats, which threatens, our local government. And we're always like, we suggest passing a law. We comply with the law. So, and I lost my second thought, but so I know what it is. And we could use the business community out there more in front of this. Now, we've had more. It's gotten more tacit approval, but we literally need folks at town meeting to come and have Schneider Electric or Crack Group or even some of the smaller businesses, even our medical. We're in Norwood. We have no Norwood Hospital. Our public safety, our ambulances are traveling all over looking for places to go. We are struggling, so we need this help. The doctors won't come to this region. They don't want it. They can't afford to live here. They can go work somewhere else. So,
Yeah, no, this is such an important point that you're making about public meetings, and whether it's town meeting or the planning board meetings, these are not places where people go to a lot unless you have something that you were typically trying to stop. There's something that has motivated you to come out. So there was some research done a few years ago at Boston University that looked at land use meetings in eastern Massachusetts, and 86% of all of these meetings had people just saying no. And so that's very hard for local officials to do anything other than say no when that is the main sentiment, even if it doesn't reflect the diversity of viewpoints in the community, the diversity of needs. And so just going there and sharing your story of how it impacts your business or how it impacts your life really does make a difference. And we're seeing that shift happen, a lot more yeses coming out and saying why. In Needham, I just think a lot about this coffee shop owner. He was so compelling in his talk, and he just said, I can't open any earlier, and I wish I could serve you coffee at 6. I can't open till 7. My employees come from 90 minutes away. That's not working, and the hospital executives, he's saying our staff is not with anywhere near here, so if there's an emergency, it's really difficult.
yeah, so we could, that's the impassioned pleas, get involved,
Share your story.
go to town meeting, advocate, write a letter to the editor. We literally are speaking into this, this environment, and it's different when you have a representative town meeting. I think it's a little different. If you have a council form of government, it's a little different. I'm not saying it's not hard, but these open town meetings where we have no control over who comes. And I mean, we have folks voting against accessory apartments. They do not want multifamily. So like that alone, you know, I do think I'll get that passed. But so that's what I would say to the business community is to try to help these governments try to sell this, because most people are all set with their housing. We on our conversation housing, we said, you know, what about your kids? And these patriots literally said, well, we had to move from, you know, Dedham or West Roxbury or Westwood, and our kids are just gonna have to do the same. I'm like, where, Holyoke? I mean, where is the final frontier at this point, you know? Like, so, I mean, it was different going to Foxborough from, you know, West Roxbury. It's a big difference, you know, where we are now. So, but these parents are just kind of like, yeah, that's the way it is, sorry.
But I think if you're able to tell a different part of the story, right? You know, everybody wants their thriving Main Street, right? Everybody loves their local coffee shops, their restaurants, the stores, the things that make your community unique. And if people understand the connection between housing and your businesses, that's not a connection people typically make. You know, so it's important to tell.
This has been great. I want to close it up. We're running out of time, and I want to close it up by asking everybody the same question. I'm going to start down at home. If you had to identify one or two areas of focus to reduce house migration, what would they be? Let's put you on the spot here.
I mean, there's just so much. I think that, you know, if we're the pipeline as your local vocational technical school or agricultural school, whatever school it is, then we have to be doing more with grants and funding and getting affordable. I mean, to me, it's just all connected, you know, affordable housing. How if I graduate cosmetologist, but she can't afford to buy a house, then how am I going to keep her there? And you know, my daughter's 19 and she's in her second year of college, but I don't know when she's going to move out. I think she could be living with me till she's 35. Exactly what you were saying, and you know, is that what we want? So what is it that we are looking for to do? I would focus on, you know, again, the free college, the dual enrollment, and I'm actually working on building that up. It's just so much.
I know we talked quite a bit about housing, but two areas that I think are critical. We did talk about traffic in the community and child care. The biggest things that we hear from job seekers is they can't afford to work. They can't afford the amount of gas it costs to drive to a certain location. And child care, and then on top of it, you know, that dog daycare is not much cheaper. So those are the two really two things I think are.
We didn't get to them.
Yeah.
Allow all the different kinds of housing. I mean, we talked about some of them. We need more rental, we need more triple deckers, we need more accessory dwelling units, we need home ownership, we need some apartments, we need a mix. And it can look different in every community, but we need more of all of the different types of housing that meet the wide needs of people in your community, people that want to be living in your community. So it's kind of like multiple.
So mine also being the planner in the housing, I think my more simplification is when we were doing our conversation on housing, we brought developers into a panel discussion and said, why is it so expensive? And one developer explained it to me so clearly, and he said, basically, whatever the lot price is, you have to multiply it by 3, and that's the house we need to build. So if you're buying a lot for $300,000, they need to build a 900,000 square home. And this was pre-COVID, so it's probably 1.2 by now. But the point being is, we need to find a way, and I don't know if it's hiring the best marketing person in the entire world for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, to like convince people that, you know, small lots, like I live in a 3,600 square foot home. I'm an empty nester. My boys both moved out September 1st, so I'm very sad. And I wanted them to live with me till I'm 35 right now. I don't know what this whole idea of raising, like launching your favorite people away from you, but I know it's a good thing. But my point being is I have nowhere to go, and I don't want to live in a condo. I don't want to live in an apartment. I want my own little patch of like 5,000 square feet, with a little home, maybe a garage, and like I want that. And zoning will never allow it with our current form of government. So is there a way collectively to all get together and do like a case where it's like, it's not like a work, and it's a kind of workforce housing. It's basically, I just want a little 1,200 square foot home on a 5,000 square foot patch of land that I can own, that I don't have to be on a condo board. And that's it. And so like, and I think that would change it, but right now with our large lot zoning, we're always gonna get the big homes, because that's all the developers can build. They're not gonna build a 1,000-square-foot house, and they're paying 300.
And I would say, so we are publishing a report soon about focused on downtown Boston, what we see in downtown Boston, effects of the pandemic, and the key data point is about 80 to 120,000 fewer people in downtown Boston on any given weekday now than there were prior to the pandemic, right? So just think of that economic activity. Now those people are somewhere, so to the extent that we keep them in Massachusetts, that could be good for downtown, but to the extent that those people have moved to Maine or to New Hampshire or to Florida, that's kind of the challenge, right? And what the data say is every 12 minutes further you live from work, you're going to work remote one more day. Now that's obviously depends on your profession, not everyone can do that. But so what does that mean? It means we need to, and by the way, the key, which having driven from Boston here today, I'm sure that you guys do not fall within this, but if you can get to work within 30 minutes, you're so much more likely to work in the office. You're so much more likely to physically be here. So how do we expand the amount of places people can get to within 30 minutes and afford to live, right? And that's kind of, so it's got transportation, housing. It's absolutely
I'm
challenging.
gonna put a plus one on the transportation. I don't know how we didn't get into that today.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if I could just tell you, I'm worried about the MBTA, because here we are, MBTA communities. Imagine if they actually build housing on the MBTA. What are we gonna do? So we gotta fix the MBTA
But
fast.
but I would say this too on the MBTA piece, and so I take the T into work every day, and the MBTA needs help, absolutely. But I will say this, not many metro areas have a rail system like the MBTA. It's New York, it's Chicago, it's kind of LA and Philadelphia, it's not that many. It is a huge asset that Massachusetts has. It's an asset that should be improved upon, but it's a huge asset. And the fact of the matter is, for me, taking it every day, it's working pretty well right now. Now, I live near the Green Line and the Red Line, so I'm lucky in that regard, but I think that we need to improve it and figure out how to do that. But it's that intersection, among other things. If you had to pick two things to me, it's transportation and housing, and the intersection between the two things.
To go back to me, I think, the partnerships are the most important for the Blue Hills Vocational School. It's partnering with the workforce board. It's partnering with apprenticeships. And also working with the unions to talk about competitive wages for those skilled laborers that are short-staffed. And even our teaching staff, there's a crisis in teaching because, again, a lot of people get to work from home, and so why would I do that when I can work
Those
from
are
home?
they don't have to live anywhere near their school.
Correct. So we have people, again, commuting like you.
Well, this has been great. I want to thank all of you. I'm going to open it up for questions. We have about 15 minutes for questions.
I have a question. I just wanted to find out, hi. I'm Danny Frost.
Speak loud,
I
louder.
just had a question regarding, you talked a lot about the housing situation and the housing crisis, and I appreciate that. And I really learned some things tonight, and I feel good about that. But I just worry about, the housing being developed and who's going to get this housing? Where is that going to be utilized? Because I have patients that I see, and some of them are close to losing their homes, and I've also taken care of the homeless. And a lot of them, were a paycheck away from losing their home and now are living on the streets. What is it that you think that the government is going to be doing for those individuals?
So glad you asked that question. Right, when we talk about 200,000 homes, we talk about zoning. Zoning is just zoning, right? How do we get intentional about who we're creating housing for? So when we talk about 200,000 homes, we actually kind of segment this out, because if we're not thoughtful, we're not intentional, then there are people who are going to get left behind. So we need to make sure that 140,000 of those are market rate, really meeting these needs, because if we're not meeting those needs, we will subsidize them. We will come up with more programs, to help the higher income that should be served by the market. 20% of these need to be affordable at moderate income. And then 10%, and this is really just kind of getting us on the path of investment because we need more, needs to be for people with extremely low incomes. We're talking 0% to 30% of the area median income. This is supportive housing. This is investing in our public housing. This is rental assistance. Massachusetts, we have 3 rental assistance programs in addition to Section 8. MRVP is the Massachusetts Rental Voucher Program. There was a period of time where it shrunk down to $24 million. It's now being funded at $219 million. And so there is a good growth. We need to get it to the point that anybody who needs it can access it so that people can compete in this market while we continue to grow the housing stock. So really, actually glad that you asked about this.
And the second question is like, is there subsidization or money or funding available for those that are about to lose their housing?
Yes, yeah, that is a
And
very,
I
right.
have a patient right now, she's on oxygen 24/7, and she now can't work and has had to go on disability, and that pays very little, maybe $900 a month, and she can't afford her rent anymore, so she's going to be evicted. And so I think about these kinds of situations in Massachusetts that I'm seeing front, you know, and I don't have an answer for her. I'm her medical provider, but at the same time, you know, I do worry, you
Right,
know,
I mean, the
about
link between
health.
health and housing is huge, right? I mean, she needs to be in a safe, stable place where she can actually be healthy. We do have one program in the state, RAF, Residential Assistance for Families in Transition, and that does provide some short-term help for
Okay.
people. So that might be, we can talk after
Well, we've
about
done the
how to access
United
it.
Way, we've gone
Yeah, so the
several
other thing is the usual
seniors, yeah.
churches and other nonprofits that can help, but
But
RAF
that's
really-
just going to put a Band-Aid on it.
It's true. What she ultimately needs is affordable housing. We have a great site in the
Well, she
state.
has housing.
Husband, she can afford it, she's not gonna be able to sustain it, and can't get a
Precisely.
voucher. So there's a site in Massachusetts, it's a wonderful site, Housing Navigator, MA.org, and it is a listing of all the affordable housing throughout the state. And it
Okay.
tells you what the rents are, it tells you what your income needs to be. Really, she may not be able to stay there for long term unless she can get a voucher, which we can talk after about just how to apply for all of that.
Yeah.
But then to look for affordable options, and then we need to keep growing. I mean, this is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
This is why a big reason why there's an increase in
No, I
homelessness.
appreciate the whole immigration piece here. You know, it's just that we've had a housing crisis
Exactly.
for a long
Yes.
time. And why is it now suddenly, you know, being discussed? And it's like, you know, I'm glad it's being discussed, but I'm feeling a little emotional about it because, you know, why did it take for immigrants to come here? For this to be such a political, you know, on the news and, you know, in Massachusetts. And that's sad to me. I grew up here and I feel sad that, you know, we're even, you know, talking about it now like it's a crisis, when it was a crisis 10 years ago.
Right, and Massachusetts
That's
created
all
a
I'm
shelter
gonna say.
system for a
Thank
reason.
you.
Any other questions? We have another question.
Thanks, Bill. Hi, Tom Maloney. I work at the Bank of Canton, and I'm on the planning board in Rentham. We will be bringing to town meeting in December the MBTA Communities Overlay District proposal. But I admire the panel very much. I really do. Rachel, I think Chapa does a great job on that. She's done a lot of work with you all. Jill's, see you again, my friend. But you're all public sector or NGO people. There's nobody up here from the private sector. So there's nobody up here who's actually built a home. And understand, Paige, you touched on it briefly, and I think it was terrific. The thing is, how much does it cost to build a home? That wasn't discussed. I talked to a builder recently, somebody you probably know, Paige, who said, given my druthers, what I could build and sell in huge quantities is the 1,200 square foot ranch on a small lot, 2 to 3 bedrooms. Zoning is tough, costs are tough. But I think one of the obstacles is, I'm sorry, I disagree with you all, this MBTA communities thing is a disaster. I mean, the reason why you're having so much trouble getting it through communities is they don't want it. I think it probably would be a good idea politically, even for the governor, okay? I probably don't agree with a lot of it, but I do admire Governor Healy, to take a step back and say, look, you're meeting so much resistance on this thing from all these towns, okay? And your analysis of the Milton case, Rachel, was quite good. That is true. They're going after the whole thing, root and branch, because they don't believe the executive branch has the power to legislate. That's really what their response to the complaint was. But I mean, I think really, if you brought into a room developers and bankers, we've got a few of your friends in the room here, we're Chamber of Commerce, we're private sector people, okay? And you put us in a room, maybe you have to have some of the political classes, whatever, say, what do you want to do? The MBTA Communities Act is focused around the metro area, which is already built out. Arlington gave you a huge section. It's a beautiful section for the MBTA Communities Act. They'll build nothing. I know the town pretty well. It's all built up. Ditto Canton, ditto Norwood added a few open spaces as well. You'll see some action there. But so that it's too metro centered. It's centered around, Doug said it. It's a you know, the MBTA is up and down. It's not the best run transportation system on the planet. Finally, one thing too. From 2019 till today, the population of the city of Boston declined by about 2.5%. The population of Worcester increased by about the same percentage. The private market is already moving to where the housing is cheaper. They'll do it. I think probably if you really want more housing, get out of the metro area. It's already built up. And the cost to go in and renovate Somerville or Arlington, and those, it's astronomical.
But I will say, where you do see development going on is in Medford and Somerville, right?
You have.
Yeah, and what
And you didn't need the MBTA communities to do it. Where it can be done, it will be done. I'm for it. I'm a housing lender. I want housing.
And I would say, I think, for me, just two pieces. I think you're absolutely right in that a lot of the kind of programs we've created over time in terms of affordability requirements, what they often also do is they require cross-subsidization bid projects, right? Which then jacks up the price of the market rate to exacerbate some of those affordability issues, right? And that doesn't mean that those programs don't work or there's not a place for them, but they absolutely can be counterproductive when you have to cross-subsidize the cost of the market rate housing within the cost of affordable within one of those units. And so what I like about MBTA communities, and I tried to express this a little bit, to me, the big part of it for me, because I'm not sure a lot of housing is going to get built. Well, I'm sure some housing will get built. It ain't going to be 300,000 units, right? What to me, it is a huge step forward in Massachusetts to do, which we do very poorly, is how do we try to incentivize behaviors for a large number of different disparate groups? Because going to 351 cities and towns to say, hey, we think that more pro-growth zoning policies are a good idea is really, really challenging. Are there ways we can incentivize more consistent policies that we think are good ideas? In these cases, maybe they're not good ideas, right, from your perspective. But what I will say, that, and where I think the state has got to go in places like transportation and housing, whether this strikes the right balance or not, is to say, listen, we spend all in, as a Commonwealth, $80 billion a year in the state budget and things like that. We do it in a bunch of different places. Oftentimes, too often, when we spend $1 on healthcare, it's just thinking about healthcare. When we spend $1 on housing, it's just thinking about housing. And when we spend $1 on climate, it's just thinking about climate. And we don't have that luxury. We're not going to raise taxes another $20 billion or another $1 billion. So we have to figure out how we're using our resources in a way that is trying to affect multiple outcomes. And I do think that that's where the MBTA community actually.
Doug, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No.
But the MBTA communities was presented as carrot and stick. And I keep asking, what's the carrot?
Okay, I can answer this.
No, but it's just, would you accept the idea that, you just said it, what if the state incentivized the building of housing? Rather than saying, we'll punish you if you don't do it, we'll give you more Chapter 90 money if you do. Or we'll do dollar for dollar match on infrastructure and roads.
Yeah, so
And that way you could get the housing you
Well,
want.
actually, so the state has a long history, I started talking about that earlier, of requiring.
Oh, that's local roads.
Yeah, sorry.
Money for
Those
those
who don't know.
Yeah. So, the state started off with Chapter 40B, they then went to 40R, which was we are paying communities to zone for it, we are paying communities to build it, and we're paying for any school cost. But I want to talk about the origins of the MBTA Communities Act. That actually came from a working group that Chapel was running of affordable housing developers back in 2013, 2014. We actually, the bill was to do multifamily zoning in every single community. What became possible, as it made its way through the legislature, is to start in one area of the state, which has transit, so it can be smart growth related, but it also has about more than 50% of the population to start there. Another important thing, which I think you were kind of starting to talk about, is this large acre zoning. So a lot of what we see around us can't be rebuilt. The most desirable neighborhoods couldn't be rebuilt under current zoning. We now require to go to Foxborough, a Gillette size, you need a football field for a single home right now. That is actually the requirement for most of our communities in Greater Boston. And so the MBTA Zoning Act, honestly, you could do triple deckers, which mirrors a lot of what you see. You could do apartment buildings. The definition of multifamily housing is 3 units or more. So in some communities, it is being used to actually put what you see into their zoning. So if your house burned down, you could actually rebuild that two-family. We've seen examples of that. You're also seeing some development proposals move forward in Lexington, where they did their zoning a year and a half ago.
Another question?
I just want to round this out a little bit between these two. I sit in the middle. I am the big bad developer. So my partners and I own this complex. We received permits from the town of Norwood for 146 multifamily apartment units. We're going to tear down abandoned, dilapidated buildings and put up new housing. My partners are in that business, and they do this all the time. So they anywhere from 125 units to 185 units, cookie cutter all day long. We just had a meeting. We cannot afford to do it. Now, the state of Massachusetts with DHCD started to work at, what Tom did like as a politician here in Norwood, the TOD Act. But that's a step towards moving forward to relieving the zoning issues. The only way you're going to get to that 2 million or 200,000 requirement is multifamily in a very quick order. So we're it. Okay? We're one of them. My partners, however, are moving forward. They have 2 underway, 6 on the table. They're all in New Hampshire and Maine. Why? No affordable housing required. Because in these costs and these interest rates, I just asked Tom where the interest rates going. They're going up. They're not going down yet. Inflation's up. We're dead in the water. Dead in the water. Now, if you eliminate affordable housing requirement, what's going to happen?
Are you asking?
Yeah, you.
Oh,
Yeah.
sure. So I didn't know if you had more to say to that. So
In the
it's
spirit of economics.
Yeah.
Supply and
So right
demand.
now, first of all, there's a lot of contributing factors to the increases in our housing costs, right? And what it costs to build, which is insane.
No, but
Which it
no.
costs.
I
So there's
get that.
affordability.
I
is
get
one.
that.
Our
I get
energy or sustainability standards.
that. We are required to do
our
20%
interest rates.
affordable.
Yeah.
If you eliminate affordable housing requirement, guess what? Developers can't help themselves. Banks can't help themselves. You know what they're going to do? They're going to build a lot more. Supply and demand will take over. We will overbuild the supply. Prices will come down. He'll pull back on lending until it tightens up, and then they'll start building some more.
Right, so I very much agree with you on supply and demand. I think we can all agree on those. And yes, we need more supply. We need more supply across. We need, like I said,
It's the quickest way to get to market.
So the nice thing about Massachusetts, first of all, is that we do have a lot of programs that can help support the development of affordable housing. Local programs like the Community Preservation Act can be used locally to help support the production. Also under the Affordable Homes Act, there is a lot of money in there, including a new program called the Momentum Fund, which is meant to help move along those mixed income deals that have gotten stalled. But you're right, it's all a balance, right? So 20% may be too high, and that's why the state actually looks at, so they're doing, they're
The market's
requiring economic
dictating it.
feasibility analysis to be done.
They're going to
If
the
one
South.
needs
They're going to the Carolinas. They're
Yeah.
going to Florida. They're going, they're going where
Right,
that is
so my
open.
point is that the state is actually requiring communities, if they want to do more than 10% affordability in their MBTA districts, they actually have to do an economic feasibility analysis. And in some markets, you can do 20%, maybe in Somerville, in others it's more like 10, in others it's 15. The thing is, supply and demand will even out. We have people right now, we have people who are caring for, we have people who will leave, who are working in the schools, if we're not paying attention to every income level. So the bulk of it is going to be market rate. But then let's use our tools to get the affordable and keep the affordable. You need zoning, you need financing, you need operating assistance.
The market will give you affordable. If you just let it do it. Doug,
Yes,
on a scale of 1 to 50,
yeah.
the highest state tax, the lowest state
Yeah.
tax, where do we sit?
So call it now 44th, something like
We're
that.
44th?
Yeah.
Low?
High, sorry,
Massachusetts?
44th was worst, however you want to define it.
So we're
No,
five.
we're number 6.
Yes, we are 6th
That's the
highest.
other way to look at it. We're the 6th highest.
Yeah.
okay?
So And I think that one of the challenges on that, right, is that historically speaking, for the last probably 20 years, Massachusetts, the rankings usually go the other way, right? For first is lowest tax, so that's why, and so historically speaking, we've been around 35th lowest, so 15th highest. So, and in all honesty, if you're Massachusetts, that's probably where you want to be, right? And what I mean by that is, we are not going to compete with Texas and New Hampshire for taxes, right? But where we were at when we were 35th was where there was major separation between us and New York, major separation between us and California, major separation between us and Connecticut. What we have now is there is no separation anymore, right? That we're right, and it depends on how you measure it. And some are the third worst. It depends on how you do the measurements.
How old are you?
I'm 43.
I'm 65.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna retire. What am I looking at? Cost of housing?
Oh, sure.
Taxes.
Yeah.
Where am I gonna go?
You
I
probably
can't
will.
go anywhere. I'm sitting on a 3.5% mortgage.
Yeah.
We're all locked in.
Yeah.
We're not going to 7%.
Yeah.
So what has to give? Cost of housing, taxes. So we're moving.
Yeah.
We're leaving.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do about it? That's what you need to take back. What are you gonna do about it? What are you gonna do to keep me here?
Yeah, and what I would say is, when you look at the older population of Massachusetts, right? And the older, which Massachusetts ranks 26th in the nation in terms of the share of our population over 65. So
That's
we're
where you're
actually
well
middle of the
fit.
pack. What's that?
That's where your wealth is.
I'm sorry, can you say that again, Doug?
26.
We rank 26th in the nation in terms of the share of our population 65 and older, right? So middle of the pack, okay? Because guess what? The whole country is aging. When you look at where the biggest challenges are for our future economy, if I had to prioritize, I would not prioritize here. I wouldn't. I would prioritize 26 to 44. I absolutely would. Resources are finite.
So you're gonna see an exodus.
And but here's what's different from the exodus we see today from the exodus we saw 10 years ago. The exodus we saw 10 years ago was disproportionately 65 plus. The exodus we see today is predominantly 26 to 44. What I also want people here to understand is you can have multiple challenges at the same time, right? We absolutely should change the estate tax in Massachusetts to get rid of it if possible, but at least get to where Connecticut and Maine and New York are, where the thresholds are $10 or $15 million. We absolutely should be thinking about those things, but we can't afford to do that at the expense of also thinking about what are some of the cost drivers affecting 26 to 44 units. We just can't.
Well, that's housing.
That's housing, it's transportation, it's absolutely taxes, right? Like, all of these things work together. That was kind of the point of the index, is you can't look at one in it, because what I will tell you is, when you look at where we are in taxes, and then you look at K-12, there's an inversion, right? When you look at some of the states that have the best tax rates in the country, they also have some of the worst K-12 schools sometimes, right? Some of these things are trade-offs, right? And so it means in all these cases, you have to think about them holistically, right? You can't just look at one side of the ledger and not the other. I think the challenge in housing, exactly as you mentioned, is some of the goals that we have that I think we really want to achieve, like affordability, the reality is when you legislate for that or mandate that, you result in unintended consequences, right? Exactly as you say. And so what is the balance, though, between saying, to Rachel's point, but we're not going to build that housing tomorrow, we got people who can't afford to live in housing today. So we have to make sure we are protecting those people and providing them with a place to live. But at the same time, we have to create a structure where you're able to build 180 units because you don't have to cross-subsidize them to such an extent that no one can afford the 160 market rate,
Public
right?
sector can never supply that
Agree.
Totally
Agree.
public-private
Yeah.
partnership.
You gotta
There's no way,
work with
otherwise
the
we would
private
have
sector.
public
I
housing, we
agree.
would have more, yeah.
And one thing I will say, having worked both in government and out of government, is the good news is these problems are complicated, right? And they all work together, right? And so I think we're not going to solve them overnight. And so all we can try to do is talk about these issues. And to me, that's the other thing I like about the MBTA communities issue or taxes. These issues are tough. They're supposed to be tough, right? The issue of how do we build more housing in Massachusetts, and do it in a way that people can afford and it's a place people want. That's a tough question, right? And so I think forcing some of these challenging conversations, whether the bill's perfect, whether or not the bill's not perfect, it is forcing an important conversation about housing in Massachusetts, and I think that's a positive thing. And then we got to figure out what to do about it.
Well, with that, we're coming to 7 o'clock. We're actually 5 minutes past 7 o'clock. I want to thank